Welcome back to XRP Spotlight, your trusted source for the latest XRP news, crypto updates, and everything happening across the digital asset world. Today's story is centered around a bold new message aimed directly at XRP holders, coming from a publicly funded journalist who believes that once major U.S. crypto legislation is officially signed into law, the entire financial and political landscape could shift much faster than most people are expecting. The headline we are breaking down today is Publicly Funded Journalist Has a Message for XRP Holders. Once clarity is signed, and this discussion is already gaining attention across social media, especially within the XRP community. As always, we are going to break down what was said, what it could mean for regulation, and why some investors believe this moment could become a turning point for XRP and the wider crypto market in the United States. Let's get straight into the details and understand why this message is creating so much anticipation. The conversation begins with the growing attention around U.S. crypto regulation, particularly two major pieces of proposed legislation known as the Clarity Act and the Genius Act. These bills are being closely watched because they are expected to define how digital assets are classified, regulated, and integrated into the broader financial system. For many investors, including XRP holders, the main concern has always been uncertainty, and these bills represent a potential path toward long-awaited regulatory clarity. The journalist highlighted that economic and political pressures are increasing at the same time as these bills move through the system, creating a situation where policy decisions may be accelerated. In simple terms, the idea being discussed is that financial stress in the wider economy could force lawmakers to act faster than expected, potentially reshaping how cryptocurrencies are treated in the United States and setting the stage for major changes in how assets like XRP operate within regulated markets. According to Vincent Scott, the publicly funded journalist behind the comments, there is a scenario forming where worsening economic conditions could push U.S. lawmakers to move quickly on crypto legislation. He specifically suggested that once the Clarity Act is signed, XRP holders should pay close attention because he expects major economic developments to follow shortly after. His message was not framed as a prediction of guaranteed outcomes, but rather as a possible chain of events influenced by broader financial instability. He pointed to ongoing concerns in the economy, including rising debt levels, increasing bankruptcies, higher delinquency rates, and noticeable layoffs across several industries. In his view, these indicators are not isolated problems but part of a larger pattern that could force policymakers to respond more aggressively. This interpretation has sparked debate because it connects traditional economic stress directly with the future of crypto regulation, suggesting that digital assets may become part of a larger national financial strategy rather than a separate policy issue. The journalist's prediction centers heavily on how Congress might react if economic conditions continue to worsen. He argued that if financial pressure becomes intense enough, it could dominate public attention and potentially create political urgency ahead of upcoming elections. This is where the discussion becomes more politically charged, because it links economic stability with legislative timing. Vincent Scott suggested that lawmakers may feel compelled to respond quickly to avoid voter backlash, especially if economic concerns become a top issue for the public. In that environment, he believes both the Genius Act and the Clarity Act could be pushed forward at a faster pace than originally expected. The idea is that instead of a long, drawn-out regulatory process, Congress might move toward immediate implementation if the situation demands urgent action. This is the kind of scenario that has caught the attention of XRP supporters, who see regulatory clarity as a key factor that could influence long-term adoption and institutional participation in the crypto market. Another key point raised in the discussion is the suggestion that Congress could technically pass or activate these laws through a simple majority vote in both chambers. Vincent Scott emphasized this procedural detail to support his argument that rapid action is not only possible but also realistic under the right political conditions. He implied that if the majority of lawmakers see economic instability as a serious threat, they may choose speed over extended debate. This part of the conversation is important because it shifts the focus from speculation about economic conditions to the actual mechanics of how legislation moves through government. It suggests that the barrier to fast action may not be legal or structural, but rather political will. For XRP holders and crypto investors, this idea adds another layer of uncertainty, because it means regulatory clarity could arrive suddenly rather than gradually, depending on how quickly lawmakers decide to respond to external pressures. The post also included a scenario where former President Donald Trump could play a role in encouraging Congress to act more quickly. Vincent Scott described a situation where Trump might highlight American crypto companies, including Ripple, as examples of innovation that should be supported through clear regulation. In this imagined scenario, regulatory agencies would already be prepared to support the industry once legislation is passed, creating a smoother transition into a more defined regulatory framework. While this remains speculative, it reflects ongoing discussions in political circles about how digital assets fit into the broader economic strategy of the United States. The mention of Ripple in particular resonates strongly with the XRP community, as it reinforces the idea that XRP could be directly impacted by any national-level crypto policy decisions that prioritize domestic blockchain innovation and financial modernization. Following the initial post, a broader conversation developed on social media platform X, where users debated the political feasibility of passing such legislation. One commenter questioned whether Democratic lawmakers would support bills that could be seen as politically beneficial to Trump, expressing doubt that bipartisan cooperation would emerge under those conditions. This reflects a common theme in U.S. politics, where legislation is often influenced not only by policy goals but also by political positioning and electoral strategy. In response to the skepticism, Vincent Scott maintained his position and reiterated that only a simple majority would be required to move the legislation forward. He also pointed out the current distribution of power in Congress, suggesting that the majority control could play a decisive role in whether these bills advance quickly or face delays. As the discussion continued, the focus shifted toward the practical reality of congressional balance and decision-making. Vincent Scott emphasized that the key question is not necessarily whether all parties agree, but whether there is enough support within the majority to pass the legislation. This argument highlights how legislative outcomes often depend more on numerical advantage than on full bipartisan consensus. For XRP holders, this adds another layer of interest because it suggests that regulatory clarity might not require complete political unity to become reality. Instead, it could depend on strategic decisions made within the majority party, especially if economic pressure increases and creates urgency around financial reform and digital asset regulation in the United States. Within the XRP community, these types of discussions often fuel optimism, particularly when regulatory clarity is mentioned as a near-term possibility. Many investors believe that once clear rules are established, institutional participation in the crypto market could increase significantly. This belief is especially strong around XRP, which is often viewed as a bridge between traditional financial systems and blockchain-based payment networks. The idea that legislation like the Clarity Act could be signed and implemented quickly adds to the anticipation that XRP may soon operate in a more defined legal environment. However, it is important to recognize that these are interpretations and scenarios rather than confirmed outcomes, and the timing of any regulatory change remains uncertain and dependent on multiple political and economic factors. At the same time, it is worth noting that discussions like this often reflect broader market sentiment rather than guaranteed policy direction. While some investors interpret these signals as bullish, others remain cautious, emphasizing that political predictions are inherently uncertain. Economic conditions, legislative priorities, and electoral pressures can all change rapidly, making it difficult to forecast exact outcomes. Still, the connection being drawn between economic instability and faster regulatory action has become a recurring theme in crypto discussions, especially among those following XRP closely. It highlights how closely tied digital asset markets have become to macroeconomic developments and government policy decisions in the United States. Looking ahead, the key takeaway from this discussion is the possibility that regulatory clarity could arrive sooner than expected if economic and political pressures align in a certain way. Whether or not Vincent Scott's scenario plays out exactly as described, it reflects a growing awareness that crypto regulation is no longer a distant topic, but something that may be shaped by immediate real-world conditions. For XRP holders, the focus remains on how upcoming legislation could define the asset's role in the financial system. If clarity does arrive through the Clarity Act or related laws, it could mark a significant shift in how XRP is treated in both institutional and retail markets, potentially opening the door to wider adoption and integration. As always, It is important to approach these discussions with caution and awareness that they represent opinions and projections rather than confirmed facts. The crypto market is highly sensitive to news, speculation, and policy developments, and narratives can change quickly based on new information. While the idea of rapid legislative action is compelling, it remains just one possible scenario among many. For viewers following XRP Spotlight, the most important thing is to stay informed, evaluate multiple perspectives, and understand that regulatory outcomes will ultimately depend on complex political and economic forces that are still unfolding in real time.